Russell this morning talked about the importance of everybody becoming engaged, whether it's government, opposition, businesses, or whatever. If our country is going to, if we're going to move our game to the next level, and I believe that Premier Canadea has managed to do that. Of course, I was intrigued by his formation of the SAGE Commission, which stands for Spending and Government Efficiency, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the results of that commission, as I'm sure everybody else is. Honorable Fabian Ricardo, we're welcoming him back to the BVI for the second time, and for that reason I'm going to ask him to speak first, because he was here 10 years ago. I know it may have been a fleeting visit, but we would like to hear whether we've done things better or whether we've done things worse. Don't commit yourself, but I don't embarrass anybody.
That's a short
But last night I was very pleased to hear him say that he has begun by changing Gibraltar, the mantra, if you want to call it that, to HMG, Gibraltar government. And one of the things that I was in Hong Kong at the moment, but I know that he had a meeting with the overseas territories recently, and he has managed to restore the cohesion and the togetherness, including Gibraltar, between the overseas territories. He said that last evening. And the other point, or reminded us of that last evening, the other point that I was impressed with that he made in his very, very brief remarks on responding to our welcome was the power of the overseas territories. He talked about, and I'm sure he's going to talk about that some more today, he talked about the online gaming power, about the fact that we have among the OTs the power in insurance and reinsurance. We have the mutual funds capital of the world. We have one of the largest, perhaps the largest in some respects, corporate domicile of the world, and also the largest and most successful fishing, I believe, area, and I believe they have also discovered oil recently. So the overseas territories are a force to be reckoned with, and we must never underestimate the power that we have. Certainly, in his very brief remarks, I was very impressed, and it gave me pause in hearing him. Honorable Ricardo places great importance on efficiency through e-government, IT, that we heard some things about this morning, and we are looking forward to his thoughts on gaming, financial services, the strides that he has made in employment of Gibraltarians. I'm hoping that he would touch on in the few minutes that he will begin to speak on it. And then third, but by no means lastly, our own Russell Crumpler from KPMG's Transactions and Restructuring Practice. Russell is very familiar with the BVI, and with his private sector experience combined with his knowledge of the public sector and the public sector of the British Virgin Islands, we are looking forward to how he is going to develop his thoughts on smart government. Now, when I saw the title of this presentation, this session, Smart Government, of course, Russell, I thought of SMART goals. What are they supposed to be? Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. I thought of that, and in some ways, it is not what we're here about, but in some ways, they are very relevant. But be that as it may, the role of government, smart or foolish, is to run the country. They're elected for that purpose. The government is responsible for developing and implementing policies and for making laws. Our mandate, again, I very quickly, we will talk about smart government in the context of smart soft power, a pipeline for great talent, leadership. We're going to talk about the public service, entrepreneurship, the global model of Singapore. I hope we get time to touch on that, and even though it's not there, I hope we can also touch on how to avoid roadkill. I was fascinated by that discussion this morning. This format is going to be, I will invite, as I said, Honorable Picado to make some remarks for about 5 minutes, followed by Honorable Canadair, and then Mr. Crumpler. Then we'll have a discussion, and then we open the floor up. I'm going to leave more than 5 minutes for discussion, because I know that this is the time that many have waited for. And I don't think it's an accident that Russell put this panel at this time of the day, because we have a room still overflowing. Nobody will leave until this panel is finished, so there'll be lots of time for. I know that because I know the gentleman. So there'll be lots of time for discussion. So enough from me. I now invite the Honorable Fabian Picado to tell us about smart government and what he considers to be the tenets and whatever he wants to say. So.
Well, I think there must have been some mistake. I think my office communicated that I don't speak for less than 90 minutes. I will try and compress those thoughts into 5 minutes. And I wanted to start by putting something up as a tweet, which I made earlier, and my presentation today is going to be based on tweets about my remarks. Because I think it's important that we embrace technology in everything that we do, and that we should lead by example. And if we're talking about people in our countries working with technology, then the least that we can do as leaders of government business is also to embrace technology. Here's one I prepared earlier. And really this is to thank Orlando for the invitation and Russell for making sure that I could be here today. I found the morning hugely educative to myself, and the afternoon a real eye-opener. I did not know that I had married something called a millennial. I did not realize that I was a Generation Xer. I did not quite understand what this meant, but I think you got us just right, and you really explained a lot for us. And thank you, Nikita, for helping me put this presentation together during the lunch hour. So, I want to talk a little bit about the overseas territories in 2.5 minutes, and then for the next 2.5 minutes talking about how we changed government in Gibraltar since we were elected. And I want to start with the concept of David and Goliath, which Russell talked about this morning when he introduced the conference. And the idea that we might be Davids facing Goliaths is something that I actually entirely reject for a particular reason. I don't believe that there are just Davids and Goliaths in the global economy today in the way that you might have believed some years ago. Just because a country is large does not mean that it is fleet of foot. Just because a country is small does not mean that it cannot achieve great things. And this is where I believe that microeconomies and micro-states like the overseas territories really do stand to make something big out of globalization, because we have the ability to be fleeter of foot than large countries. We have the ability to move quickly. We can really legislate at a pace that cannot be seen in other places. Therefore, we can adapt quickly in a world that is now defined by speed. The speed at which we get news, the speed at which we digest things, the need to multitask. It's not just women who have to do that anymore. Boys have had to learn how to do it too. And that makes us, I think, something of world leaders in the way that we can deliver change. Now, I want to look at how we've done that in Gibraltar in a particular way to ensure that we are never going to be roadkill in the international economy. Not even a mosquito dead on the windscreen of the international economy. We're going to be driving this international economy together with our colleagues in the other overseas territories. Let's look, for example, at the BVI that I came to 10 years ago. and the law firms that were here and how they have grown. The law firm that I was employed by before I was elected in Gibraltar, Hassan's, it's not well known internationally like Harney's, like Conyers, like Walker's, but it went from being a 12-lawyer firm in the 1990s to being over 85 lawyers now, 250 professionals. The growth that we've seen ourselves, the growth that you've seen yourselves, a lot of it homegrown. Some of it important. It's important that in a globalized economy, we attract people from other jurisdictions that can add something to what we do. So that's not something to be afraid of. The way that we've changed our tourist product, for example, in Gibraltar in the past 2 years, our previous administration was not enamored of niche tourism. But we had a leader in our community, Mr. Brian Callahan, who runs one of our hotels. He was tired of his hotel being empty in winter. So 10 years ago, he started a chess festival. It was small at the time. The Telegraph this year called it the best international open chess festival in the world. And we don't just fill his hotel, we fill every hotel in Gibraltar and every hotel in neighboring Spain as well for about 10 kilometers around us. Now, if we can be fleet of foot enough, we can achieve that. And in 2 years, we've introduced new niche tourism products to Gibraltar, like a music festival. We have some of the top artists in the world already in Gibraltar. We're going to welcome some great new artists this year. A jazz festival, an international literary festival. I'm very excited about some of the ideas that you're knocking about here with food and wine. As you can see, I like my food. It's not a festival intended for me, but I think it's the sort of thing that people like. So when you look at all of those things, I think that you are absolutely right, Premier, to have bet on Latin America as a place to which you need to aim your tourism product. Why? Because I got married in 2011, and in that year we traveled to Turkey, and all I could hear around me was Portuguese and Cantonese being spoken. All the big spenders were Portuguese, actually Brazilians, of course, speaking Portuguese. I was in Florida last week on my way here, and in the Sawgrass Mills Mall, perhaps because I look like this, everybody thought I was Brazilian, and they would stop and talk to me in Portuguese, and I would reply in Spanish. But it's incredible how all the top-end shops at Sawgrass Mills and at the Freedom Outlets in Orlando, all of them have people behind the counter who speak Portuguese, not Brazilian, of course. So there are movements here that we all need to tap into. We've introduced a visa waiver scheme for Brazilians, and for Chinese people, and for Indian people, and for Russians, so that it's not difficult to get into our country, as long as they've got Schengen multiple entry visas, which ensure that the security of the individual that we're dealing with has been dealt with. Now, those are called the BRIC countries, of course, and everybody knows what that means. I don't need to define it for you. But for the reasons that Mrs. Smith has just outlined, I put it to you that we are actually quite a big player there ourselves. If the OT leaders can work together more closely, and Gibraltar has been responsible for not being a part of the OT group for the past 15 years as it should be, and I'm very pleased that we're back. If we can work together, listen to this, and Mrs. Smith gave you an indication of my thinking on this. Imagine one country with 500,000 people that leads in captive insurance business, in company corporations, in the hedge fund business, being the hedge fund capital of the world, that has the largest reserves of oil and fish stocks in the world, untapped, and that is the online Las Vegas of the world. That's 5 OT territories with a total population of under 500,000 people. Shouldn't we be working together and sharing that wealth? Because if we do, and we manage to harness that, and Orlando and Craig have been working together with me and other overseas territory leaders to see whether we can do that. Maybe people around the world will be talking about the BRICO countries. Gibraltar has gone from being 9th on the list of GDP per capita around the world when I was elected to 4th. Bermuda is 3rd. Craig knows I don't like to come second to anyone. Working together, the BVI, Gibraltar, Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, the Falkland Islands, the Turks and Caicos, St. Helena, Pitcairn, all of us together, we could be way up there in the top 5. distributing wealth to our people to ensure that smart government gives back to the people. That doesn't mean there aren't challenges. And Gibraltar has become number one in online gaming by being the toughest regulator of online gaming in the world. And almost 20 years ago, we thought our financial services business was over when the EU started its anti-money laundering aggressive approach. And Gibraltar thought this was the end. In fact, tough regulation in the EU, which means that Gibraltar has had to comply with all EU directives because we're part of the EU, has actually made Gibraltar a stronger jurisdiction in terms of the financial services we offer from there. We're not looking at the numbers that you're looking at here. We're no longer offshore. It's a word we don't like. We're probably mid-shore now. 10% tax, it's another word I discovered today. I'm going away with a new vocabulary. Millennials, mid-shore, Generation X. But regulation was a good thing. And Gibraltar became a place where people no longer said you would go to launder money. Well, of course, the Spaniards constantly say that in their constant onslaught against Gibraltar, but anybody who is reasonable has taken us off their blacklist, has decided that Gibraltar is compliant. And what I say when I go around the world is that Gibraltar believes in a culture of compliance. And I know that's the language that you speak in the BVI also. It's a language that Orlando always speaks when I see him speak internationally. And that is, in my view, the future for the overseas territories. Not an embarrassment to the United Kingdom, but something for the United Kingdom to be proud of, something that the United Kingdom can look at and say, those territories don't cost me a penny, and they make me proud to see what they have achieved. Now, in order to do that, it doesn't just require that we have strong private sector innovators. It requires that the public sector make itself available as a facilitator to the public sector, to the private sector in those overseas territories. And that's what I hope that we've been able to do. And I got so excited, I've forgotten to click and to show you my tweets. But this is what I've been talking about, and I will hopefully now catch up with myself with this tweet. And I think it's fundamentally important that those who are in the public sector see themselves not as being in a job for life, but being in the job of facilitating those who are in the private sector delivering growth in our economy. I also think it's a fool's errand to believe that the biggest spender in your economy should always be the government, because in the long term, that is only going to deliver a deficit. And that's why I think working together, all of the OTs can learn from each other and what it is that they've done to deliver lower debt, to deliver streamlined public sectors. I'm working very closely with my own public sector civil servants to deliver new working hours, to deliver a more efficient government machinery. That, I think, is the future. We've set out an aim in our manifesto to halve our debt gross and to reduce our net debt by 10% by the date of the next election. Not only are we well on the way to achieving that, I think we're going to exceed that, but only because we're engaging with the public sector to deliver for the public sector and for the private sector. Now, how do we achieve efficiencies in the public sector? I don't think it's just about saying to civil servants, you've got to work harder, you've got to realize that you're there to facilitate the private sector. I think it's about giving the public sector the tools, and that is a difficult thing. In Gibraltar, there are 4,000 public servants. We are the largest enterprise on the rock. We cannot change everybody's computer overnight because that's 4,000 new machines. In my law firm, 250 people, we'd have a rolling scheme where we change somebody's machine perhaps once every 3 or 4 years. So we need to roll out that type of change slowly. But what you cannot do is expect people to do a job if you don't give them the tools. And that means investing in the infrastructure, and in particular, the computer infrastructure that people are using. When I was elected, I found that there were civil servants, and everybody complains about civil servants in Gibraltar. They don't do any bloody work, one thing or the other, right? I found that there were civil servants who didn't have a PDF program on their machine, who had to send PDFs that they received from the private sector home to themselves, to open up at home, to come back in the morning or after lunch, and then produce the document for an individual. Well, look, actually that shows that people are concerned. They're investing their own time at home. They're using their own infrastructure at home to deliver. So we have to deliver the tools to the public sector in order to allow them to do the work that they need to do. Now, if we do all that, then I believe that we will not be roadkill this century. I believe this is our century. With everything that we can do, this can be our century. And we can get stronger together, and we can get stronger internationally, and we can become a force to be reckoned with. Because I don't have 90 minutes, I'm going to call it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Premier Kennedy, are you set?
Yeah, I'm set. I just want to get you water here first. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just say that this is my first time here. It's a beautiful place. Beautiful place. So I want to say to Orlando, my friend, and I can call him by his first name, I want to say thank you. Russell, thank you for the invite to be here this afternoon. For a moment there, I was saying to myself, Fabian, they spent a lot of money for us to be here for 10 minutes to say something, but I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to share with you the experiences that we are having individually, but more importantly, how we have the opportunity to collectively come together. And as you just heard from Fabian, we have a unique opportunity. You know, far too many times we spend worrying about what might happen as opposed to what could happen. You understand what I mean by that? We keep worrying, well, you know, I remember the commercial I saw of the young boy who wanted to ride on a skateboard, and you know, the mother was worried that he might fall off the skateboard, scratch his arms up, scratch his knees up, so what she did was she wrapped him up in bubble wrap. And once you put him in bubble wrap, the whole experience was lost, and he couldn't get on the skateboard and enjoy it. So you see up here, you see the thinking man. And the reason that that is up there is primarily because I find as a politician, very difficult to get a moment to just think about things. Just to get away, Orlando. No matter where I go, but I found a place. Baby, and I found a place.
Where?
The bathroom.
I do my best tweeting.
You know when I want to come in there? Yeah, not even a significant other. And I was thinking, as you see the thinking man here, and I recall in my philosophy class, we were asked a question by the teacher, what do you think he's thinking? And we had all of these wonderful explanations as to what he might be thinking. And I have a good friend from South Korea named Moo, like Carl Moo. And he was listening to all of this, and he came up with one of the most wonderful answers there was. Simple, basic. He said, he's wondering, where's my pens? Sometimes we think so long about things, we think them, they become so complicated, and once they become complicated, they become out of reach. It's like the young man who wants to ask a young lady out for a dance, or just to go out for a drink, or carry her books, whatever the case may be that they do now, tweet or whatever the case. He overthinks it, and by the time he gets around to asking it, you know, it's 20 years later, and she looks at him and she says, well, why didn't you just say something? Now, I went back to that wonderful place we call the bathroom, and I started thinking about where we are as overseas territories. You know, Orlando and Fabian will appreciate this, and so those from the financial sector that are here. We've been jumping through so many hoops. You know, I don't even know what a hoop is anymore. The OECD said that the goalpost is here, and this is what we need to do as IFCs, International Finance Centers. We got to comply to these regulations. FATCA came along and said, well, hold on a second, it's not there, it's over here that you need to be. You need to be kicking the ball into the goal here. FATCA came along, and we're trying to get to the regulation of FATCA, and OAD is saying, well, no, quite frankly, it's way over here. And after the time we got to OAD and OECD and FATCA and all of these acronyms, multilateral agreement comes along and says, hey, what are you doing? And I sat there thinking, where are we as overseas territories in this whole thing? And I want to go to this here. We are not in this game of international finance business to survive. Survival is not good enough. We're in it to thrive. But the question is, how willing are you in your individual homes, not government, in your homes to accept change? See, you voted for change. The question is, do you want it? Because we're going to have to do some things that may not always make you feel comfortable in order to not survive. We can survive and do some very comfy things for you so you can at least get by. But I don't think anyone in this room wants to just get by. And I can certainly know that your kids in the educational system don't want to survive. They're looking to thrive. Ask them what they want to do. I want to be a millionaire. Because it's about economics for them. And so we are at threat if we allow the big boys to come along and say, boo. My concern is that as overseas territories, when they have said boo, we have cowered behind and said, oh, okay. When we are the leaders in international finance, we should be standing up and say, hold on a second here. No, I'm going to pick on the governor. He's just sitting down in the front row, and I tend to be a bit blunt sometimes in my exchanges with the governors. But quite frankly, my finance minister and myself have been going away to Europe and talking about the G8 nations and what they're doing and this beneficial ownership and all of these things, and sitting down and saying, well, hold on a second here. We've been leading the way. What are you doing? We've been leading the way. So my question to them is, not question, but proclamation, you go first. Because I can guarantee you, those of you who are in the financial center and know what's going on, if whoever goes first is the first loser. Believe me when I tell you. Because people, I said in a BBC interview just the other day, and I had one of the NGOs, and we've decided that we're going to engage one-on-one with the NGOs and educate them about what it is that we do. The challenge is this here, Orlando, and I can speak to you directly in Fabian. How well do your regular homes understand the market that you're in? Your young people should be talking about the fact that you are the incorporators of the world. If they are not talking about it, how can you do it? Are your young people talking about the fact that we are the online gamers of the world? New industry. Successful economy. If our young people don't understand it, that's why they're going into psychology and all of these other things and can't find a place when they come back home because they don't understand the industry that they're in. And so we have got to educate our kids, not when they get to high school, but when they're in nursery school about what it is that we do. I mean, you've got to understand something. What took a lifetime for you to understand and know, these kids are born with it. You give a 3-year-old an iPad, and he or she will show you how to use it. You understand what I'm saying? So taking it to the next level really should be our charge. We should be going after excellence. And I'm going to be frank with you. We haven't been. We have allowed ourselves to accept second and third place. No, Fabian and I get going at each other, we both like to come first. So, whenever we get together, he's always doing something. Like yesterday, he left on the boat without me. Just so that he could see Orlando first. Now, if you don't have, that's what your leader should be about. Now, I must admit, Orlando came in, we got into his office, and he showed us this wonderful view of the water, and I was jealous. So I've got to go back and change my office. There has to be a drive that you have as a people to want to do better. And we're worrying too much about, well, this might happen and that might happen. Nike came up with the simplest of advice, and none of us take it. Just do it. have the technology available to you. You have the resources available to you. Go after it. Let me talk to you about the phenomena that's going on around the world right now. There's a battle between socialism, democracy, and the likes. You know, democracy talks about the fact that you can't have economic empowerment without democracy. That's the United States and the likes. The Chinese came along and said, you don't need democracy for economic empowerment. Take a look at what they are doing right now. They are all over the world showing their economic prowess. The Asian nations, the Eastern nations, are showing their economic prowess without democracy. And so there is a battle going on. But the one beautiful thing that you already heard during lunchtime, we have something very significant available to us that the rest of the world doesn't have. And that is, we know how to build relationships. We know how to build relationships. And I want to give you a quick example of Bermuda and how you build relationships. You know, back during the Boston Tea Party issues and the likes, Bermuda was stockpiling gunpowder for the Brits. And we had this huge storehouse of gunpowder. And we were already trading with the U.S. You know, we were sending agricultural things over there because they were trying to establish themselves. And the George Washington wrote a letter to the governor of Bermuda, and he said, listen, you know, we got this relationship here, and we've been buying from you. You got this gunpowder stored out there. This is true. You think you could give us some of that gunpowder? Because the Brits are coming. Yeah, this is true. And true privateers as we are, we said, what the heck, sure. You want some gunpowder? We'll send you some gunpowder. And so we sent them some gunpowder to neutralize the situation. And to this day, Bermuda and Canada are the only two places that don't need a visa to go to the United States. Relationships. The other important thing from that was not only do we not need visas, but with Europe, we can now travel throughout Europe. Our kids can go there and work freely, go to schools freely. We know how to work a relationship. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? And when it comes to international finance, and us not just surviving but thriving, I'm glad to be leading with Orlando. Sorry, Orlando here and Katie. You cut back on the food there. What you're saying there. I'm glad to lead it because we have a camaraderie that is saying to the rest of the world, I'm not going to accept that. We want to thrive and not just survive. And so we have the ability, because as you've already heard, the Eastern nations are about relationships. So we've been working in North America, we've been working with Europe, but it is the Eastern nations who are emerging. And they have disposable income like you've never seen before. We need to be in that market we have been missing. That is where the opportunity is. So the goal for us as overseas territories must be that we thrive in our core businesses. Where are there opportunities? We've already identified where those opportunities are. Now all you have to do is just do it. Can I have the next slide? No, stop praying. God's too busy to find your parking spot. This company is called ParkFast. Now, the reason I put that out there because I was back on that wonderful place called The Throne and thinking, they're thinking about this here, and I saw this and chuckled at it. This is a classic example of just do it. Just get on with it. You've been thinking about it too long. You've been in meetings too long. How many of you are in meetings after meetings after meetings after meetings? And what are your local people, politicians, saying to you? Well, when are you going to get it done? And as government officials, we hear that all the time. You want to know why? Because we're meeting and meeting and meeting and meeting. When the young people today are voting for change, they want to see results immediately. And the reason why you're in that position is because they sense something about you, Fabian. They sense something about you, Orlando, that you just get it done. No, you just gotta go ahead and do it. Miss Smith up here, she strikes me as, look, you gotta just get it done. She said to me last night, man, talk is cheap, man. That's what she said. She said, talk is cheap. I understood exactly what she meant, just do it. No, and there was nothing shaky going on there. I was just, talking business. We were talking business. And so I'm making jest of this, but I hope that you're getting the message here. This was a company who thought about it, but didn't just think about it. They went even further and said, well, look, you know how many of us, when we're looking for a parking spot, they know, they did their homework. Oh, Lord, please let me know parking spot. It reminds me of my mother. She keeps saying, Sonny, I'm going to buy a lottery ticket. We don't have a lottery in Bermuda, but she's going to buy one anyhow. She keeps saying, and when I win that $1 million, I'm going to give you $1 million. And she kept saying this and saying this and saying this. And I said to her, well, when are you going to buy a lottery ticket? This is true. When are you going to buy the lottery ticket? You're not going to win unless you do something. And your young people, quite frankly, are asking you to do something. And if you listen very clearly, you hear the pathway to take. I'm going to remind all of you, and I want all of you to know this here, that when your government decides to make some decisions that you're not quite clear on, Orlando and I and Fabian know that money follows the path of least resistance. So, that's why we're in the position that we're in today, okay, as financial centers. But what we have allowed to happen to us is local politics has gotten in the way of our prowess as international masters of what it is that we do. And it goes down to the fact we need to educate our young people about what it is that we are doing. We have got the same problem in Bermuda, and they're going away and being teachers, and for the sake, too many lawyers. Okay, and I'm gonna end with this here because we want to ask a lot of questions. I'm gonna end with this here about lawyers, especially. I got 5 of them in my cabinet, and they drive me crazy. So a 5-minute conversation turns into 2 hours. When I got here, it's my job to understand a little more about BVI because it's my first time. And I noticed, just like us, you drive on the left side of the road, but you drive in left-hand side cars. What is that? Can't figure that out. Because quite frankly, I see a legal issue here because if I'm driving on the left-hand side in a left-hand drive car and I go over the line and hit somebody, I'm just going to say to the judge, man, me can't see the line. That's why I drove over the line. I can't see it if I'm on the left-hand side. I just can't see it. So I thought about this here for a while and I said to myself, well, there's got to be a reason. So when I first got off the plane, you know what I noticed? A lot of people walking on the streets, exercising. And so it made sense to me now why the steering wheel's on the left-hand side. You don't want to knock them down. A very simple solution to this here. I figured out. I was thinking, you know what? And then after I thought about that, I said, you know what? You've been sitting here too long, your legs are getting numb. It's time to get up and do something else. So with that in mind, with the economy of the world and the way that it is fluctuating, there is a battle going on. The Indians believe in soft power, that is transforming of the heart. And so their approach really is to get into your home. They bring their doctors to your shores and the likes. The Chinese believe in economic power by putting it into your pocket instead of going into Africa and the likes and building massive roads to allow commerce to happen. And the United States, quite frankly, sorry to the Americans that are here, are still trying to figure out where do we fit in this whole thing. Really and truly. They will emerge. Believe me, I believe that the Americans will continue to lead. You know, there was a time where their GDP amassed more than all the rest of the world's GDP put together. So they know how to do it. But they are suffering also from the fact that just do it. That's what they're suffering from. And so with that in mind, I'll close with the fact that we won't be roadkill because we want to thrive, and that's a lot. And I said nothing about sage, so we'll get to
I know
that.
we'll get to that too.
Yeah.
We'll get to it. So, Russell?
Oh.
This Russell Crawford.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to my distinguished panelists for giving me an incredibly difficult act to follow. Feel a little bit like John Major coming after Margaret Thatcher, or Brown coming after in fact, I might just get the picture of the thinking man back up whilst they go to sit on the toilet and work out what we've heard a lot about transformational government, about change, about seizing opportunities. What I'm going to try to do now is bring it back down to what does that actually mean day to day for public service. Just touching on some very broad issues whilst I do so. When I've been talking about this in previous years, we've talked about government being like a limited company. So the government of the British Virgin Islands Limited, acting like a private sector organisation in terms of its performance, what it does day to day, how it acts. I'm going to change that today and say it should be government PLC. And why I say PLC versus just limited is absolutely fundamental. A PLC has to be transparent and it has to be accountable to the people that it's our key stakeholders, its shareholders. So for government, it's voters. But a PLC has to put out there what it is doing, what its plans are, what people are reporting on it, internally and externally, what it's saying. And therefore it is held to account. So I think that if government starts to think as a public service, we act like a PLC, then by putting it out there, you're saying to everybody, this is my goals, this is what we're trying to achieve, and then you're much more likely to strive towards those goals and to thrive, as the Honourable Pembrose said. When we talk about accountability, we talk about transparency, that also then leads to confidence. That's not just confidence of the general public in the public service, but absolutely crucially, it's the confidence of the people working within the public service that they have in their own organisation. Without public servants, public officers having that confidence in their own organisation, you're hamstrung from the outset. And I think that it's absolutely right, as Mr. Smith mentioned, the HR role within government, within public service, is absolutely key. I think HR is fundamental in driving a high-performance culture. And a high-performance culture is a culture then that allows the best people within government to thrive. It allows those people that are struggling within government to be helped out, to be assisted, to be driven, to improve their performance and all be pulling towards that same aim. The same aim you've been telling people about. It also means that change is not something to be feared. People in high-performance cultures don't fear change. They see it as an opportunity. They champion change, they welcome it, and they fight for it. That change then becomes continuous and creative. And it's a bit of a spiral, so it inspires confidence, it inspires transparency and accountability. And it cycles round and round and round in a virtuous cycle, where everything always then improves. People talk about the public sector, and there's been all sorts of surveys done being an inefficient, large body of individuals, and this is onshore, offshore, wherever, mid-shore, and therefore not very good at adapting to change and dealing with change. Well, I would challenge that, particularly in the sorts of jurisdictions that our panellists are from, and of course we see here today. They're saying, actually, we're a small jurisdiction. Our public sector, whilst being the predominant organisation, our civil service within this jurisdiction, is still a relatively small organisation. So therefore, we can be nimble. We can break down the different silos between our ministries and our divisions. We can work together, and we can be nimble with regards to change. And therefore, we shouldn't be reactive. We should be being proactive. And that is what allows us to deal with and react to and develop the transformational sorts of policies we've been hearing about today in terms of tourism, financial services, and in general policy working together. By being nimble, proactive, and not afraid of change, the public service can be fit for purpose in the 21st century, and therefore all the things that my distinguished panelists have been talking about can be achieved. Within that, though, we do have to acknowledge that there are things that cannot be done within public service. Politically and economically, and I'll come back to the economically, it's difficult to shed jobs, for example. It may be that someone could do a feasibility study and say, well, actually, public services, 10%, too many staff working for it. But actually, economically, in such a small environment, it doesn't really make any sense to try and make those staff cuts, because then those people have to be supported by the state, they become a bit of a drain on the economy, and they're not putting money back into the economy and generating it. So it's arguable, and this is something we looked at a little bit when we did our work with the government here, it's actually arguable that there is no real benefit to making redundancies, in order to streamline operations. It's much more about looking at the staff you've got, making sure they're deployed efficiently, and if one then can build capacity in certain areas, retraining, reskilling, and making sure everyone is used to their maximum ability. So that's an acknowledgement of the limitation that is maybe specific to these sorts of island nations. The UK decides for its public service and has benefited from it, not here. Scope, that's another limitation. We've got to be very aware of what a public service should be doing. What are their skill sets? Public service shouldn't be running McDonald's. That's for someone from the private sector with international, with the right skills to be able to do that. And therefore, it's about thinking what are the core things the public service needs to be doing, and driving those core things with the high performance culture, with the change management, the preparedness to be nimble. And that is what I think public service needs to look like, to be smart, to be able to be transformative in the way that we've all been talking about. And so we go back to government PLC. Well, that's exactly what the best PLCs, the best limited companies are doing. That is how they look, that is how they look at themselves, and how they drive themselves forward. And they will sit there and say, well, we cannot do it all ourselves. We do sometimes need outside assistance. At the firm I work for, KPMG, I've just spent a week in the UK doing various training courses. We didn't run those ourselves. We had external consultants come in and run those courses. I had a business psychologist working with me for the last week, which was scary. But it was someone external, because we recognised they've got the skill sets to bring to bear on the issues and the challenges that we face as an organisation. That's exactly what the public service needs to do and does do. But I would close on my sort of looking at it more internally by saying it is clear from the work we've done with public service here that there are people, many, many people within the BVI public service who are dedicated, extremely hard working, and really believe in the BVI. If everyone in public service can do all those things, then all the transformational stuff can work.
And Russell, I believe the public servants there would like me to thank you for the compliment that you paid to them. I think the comments that you've made are a perfect segue to go back to the two honourable gentlemen. You made the point about government being should be considered a PLC, and it should be goal focused and accountable. You also made the point that change ought not to be feared, that change inspires transparency, and that as small countries we can be nimble, break down the silos in order for transformation to occur, and so on. And all very true, and from the little reading that I have done in terms of what these two gentlemen have achieved, they can develop those points even further in terms of the practical. So perhaps, Honorable Mr. Kennedy, you could begin by telling us about your SAGE Commission, which is stands for Spending and Government Efficiency. I think that's a perfect place for you to start. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Russell just said something rather interesting. Rather interesting. He said that he got a business psychologist from outside. I don't know what that means, but anyhow, from someone from outside. And you know the old adage that says, you know, you can't see the forest for the trees because you're in the middle of the picture here. SAGE really is about, and what we did in Bermuda was to go to the professional sector, the private sector, who had made the swift moves when the recession struck to start reorganizing. What happened was governments during the recession did not reorganize when it hit. And so that's why we're in the positions that we are today. But the private sector did. And so we asked if the private sector would come together, and we put a commission, a board together to come in and take a look on the inside. Now, that caused some serious angst in civil service because, you know, they've been doing it for a long time and they know how to do it. But what we didn't have was a real objective audit being done of how we do things. And so once we got the private sector to come together on a board and then take a look at what it is that, to look at spending and government efficiency, it was startling what they walked away with as far as information was concerned. And I didn't see it as a bashing of government and its processes, but really about a solution going forward. If you don't know your strengths and weaknesses, then how can you move forward? And it's really for us as a new government coming in, we just basically, for local politics, wanted to use the opportunity to bash the former government for the position that we were in. But I felt that, and with the finance minister, that would not be very astute of us if we continued on in that vein without having a SAGE commission come in, take a look at what it is that we're doing, and tell us honestly where we can improve. Or we're just going to continue to spin our wheels. Now, quite frankly, I'm not sure about BVI, but I know with Gibraltar and ourselves, you know, we're the largest employers in the island, government. And when we started taking a look at some of the issues that we had, it was startling. We have 6 different unions, and they all were negotiating separately. We had some unions who had negotiated unlimited sick time, paid sick time. How in the world can the public service pay for that? And these are things that were going on, and there's no business in the world that can survive like that. And so we need to be honest with ourselves and accept the fact that if we want change, there are going to have to be some things that we need to do. Now, I believe that as far as inefficiencies are concerned, we found that in some cases, you know what it was costing us for just coffee alone for all the civil service? Back in the day, you bought your own mug in Maxwell House. You know, and I give props to Peter Island. The lady came this morning, she said, you know, there's nothing like Folgers in your cup. And, you know, she was bringing coffee, and the thing is that we've gotten so bloated that some of the practical things that we can cut back on haven't been cut back on. The first thing for SAGE is to do this, to cut back on the access, not the people. You get that? The first point of attack is going after the inefficiencies and the processes that don't make sense, that are costing you money. You start there. And the excesses of, I mean, we have some departments who have paper for the whole year. Why? And you can get it delivered to you every week or the likes. So we're having to pay for storage and the likes. And so we're having this frank conversation. But the beauty of SAGE is this, is that it went out and it was educational. It went out into the public sector and had these town hall meetings, as we call them, so that the public got a chance to also contribute to what they felt was the best way forward. Now you have public buy-in. And it forces governments to do what is right. You know, SAGE really is about the inconvenient truth. And I call it inconvenient truth because politically it's inconvenient. You know, we gotta do some things, and when you start telling people to cut back on the number of coffees that they have in a day, that becomes a whole battle in and of itself. Just coffee alone. we haven't even gotten to the inefficiencies of process. And so, you know, it's vitally important that we be honest with ourselves and accept the fact that through local politics, we've allowed ourselves to become so bloated that we can't afford ourselves. That we actually can't afford ourselves. And we can't allow this to continue on because government is about facilitating the private sector, even from the larger nations like the United States and the likes, because they recognize that through technology, Gibraltar, Bermuda, and BVI can take them out. That's why all that noise is being made, and the scare tactics are going on, because we have become so good at it is that what we do. But where we have failed is in the local politics. That's where we have failed. And so the inconvenient truth is this here, that we don't have the luxury right now as leaders, and we talk about this here, of being political. We have to do what is right to ensure that we survive and thrive.
Thank you very much.
Chief Minister, before you begin, I had the privilege of attending the JNC meeting where your deputy talked about some employment policies that Gibraltar had introduced, incentivizing Gibraltarians to return to Gibraltar and so on. So I wonder if you would include some of those points in your...
Okay, thank you. I think it's important that we understand that change is an agent which is constant. We won an election 2 years ago on the concept of change. We had a government for 16 years, and I find that when I analyze Gibraltar elections and when I analyze American elections, the most successful slogan in the history of elections in Gibraltar is change. But you can only use it at the right time, and it works at the right time. I believe that there will be roadkill in Gibraltar in the next decade, and I expect to be it. Because I do not expect to be an agent of change for my own change. I'm delivering change now,
Well said.
but I don't want to be there to deliver change in 10 years' time. What have we changed? And Craig is absolutely right. Change is uncomfortable when it comes to those who were luxuriating in what the status quo was giving them. We changed an unemployment of 1,200 people down to just over 350 in under 2 years. How have we done that? Well, we've done that by creating a job strategy, which creates apprenticeships inside industry. We've said to industry, we won't take somebody and train them after they finish school for another 2 years or another 3 years. We are going to give you an individual that can read and write, that can count, and that can do all the basics. We're going to give them to you for a week. And if at the end of that week, you don't like the color of their eyes, you don't like the way they smell, you don't like the way that they look at you, you can send him straight back to us. If you keep him, because at the end of that week you like what you see, then you've got another 4 weeks to decide whether you enter into a contract with him at the end of a 12-month period. If you do, we will pay for him for the first 12 months. That has cost us money. But we're in year 2. We're in year 2. Already over 600 people have found jobs which are permanent. We're no longer paying for them. In year 2, we're doing it only for 6 months, and employers are taking people on permanently and asking to pay for them themselves after 2 and 3 months. So we've delivered huge change to young people there. Now, what are we building on? When we were first elected, when the Socialist Party was first elected in 1988, only a few select Gibraltarians went away to university. Nikita, I'm so glad to see you back. Can you go back to my presentation and put up the students' tweet? In 1988, only a select few would go away to university. Their families could afford it. As soon as we were first elected, we said, right, anybody who gets a place at a UK university will have their scholarship paid for by the government of Gibraltar. At that time, the government of Gibraltar was running a recurrent deficit, and a deficit in recurrent expenditure. 3 years later, we were running a surplus. This year, I declared a record high surplus in the history of Gibraltar. And what is the greatest capital that we have to deliver that? We are a landmass, 2.5 miles by 1 mile, and most of that is taken over by a rock that you may have heard of. Our people are the only thing that we can trade on. We now have one of the best educated populations in Europe, let alone perhaps the world. Anybody who gets a place at university can go away and study at university. Our opponents then said it would bankrupt the nation. Actually, it's made the nation. We lost an election 8 years after that in 1996, but the opposition that took over continued. We think today, to be competitive, Gibraltarians need to have more than just a first degree. So second degrees and master's degrees that were just then available on a discretionary basis have been made something that we give everyone who acquires the opportunity to study for a master's. This gentleman is the chairman of the Gibraltar Law Students Association, as I found out a few minutes ago. And he asked me on Twitter, and I think I should be accessible to all my shareholders, whether there are any law firms present in the BVI looking for Gibraltarian bar graduates. Well,
Lawyer?
go to the next slide. I just told him I was referring his tweet to the conference, so I hope that somebody would reply to him. But there was a serious point. One of your students said that it's difficult when you're getting work experience if you're just photocopying, if you're just shredding. Well, I was a law student once, and I shredded and I photocopied, and I asked myself, why am I being asked to shred this document? Why is it not being filed? Let me read it before I shred it. Let me just have a look at what it is that they're trying to do. I just read The Firm, by the way, which was a great book by John Grisham, as you know, which involved a lot of shredding, so I was very interested in what I was being asked to do. It strikes me that because we're all educating professionals in Bermuda, in the BVI, the Cayman Islands, and Gibraltar, we might actually want to give them all the international experience they don't seem to have when they're competing with people from London and from further afield. Why don't we have an exchange where you send us 5 BVI law students, I send you 5, Greg will send us 5 each, and we can start that process going. And then at the end of that process, perhaps at the end of 12 or 18 months, our law students will be the ones best qualified for jobs because they will have had the greatest exposure to the offshore world. I think this is a combination of what we've done and what we can do together. And looking at what we've done with our public sector also, just for a moment. The public sector in Gibraltar has become very comfortable. It's important that they should be able to do their jobs and have the equipment, as I told you before, but it's also important that they deliver. So one of the things that I'm asking the public sector in Gibraltar to do is to commit to delivery times to the private sector and to private citizens. We refer to Gibraltar as Gibraltar PLC, and therefore all members of the civil service of Gibraltar, as far as I'm concerned, are employed by Gibraltar PLC and have to respond to their shareholders. Civil servants in Gibraltar want to change the hours that they work, and I have no problem with that. In a technologically advanced economy, you don't have to be at your desk all the time. Teleworking should become a reality also in the public sector, if possible. But we have to be ready to deliver to the private sector. So if you want a passport, if you want an identity card, if you want a company's registry document, whatever it is that you want from the public sector, you should be entitled to get it within a fixed period of time. You shouldn't have to wait as long as they want or as long as they think is appropriate. So what we're introducing is the concept that people are told when they will have their response from the private sector. And again, from the public sector. And again, I think it's important there to lead by example. I wrote to my predecessor as Chief Minister when I was first elected in 2003 to our House of Assembly. And when he left in 2011, he hadn't yet replied to my letter. And that's Peter. Those of you who know him know what he's like, right? And I'm not here to talk about my local politics. But when I was elected, I entered into a commitment with my shareholders that every letter that came to my office would be acknowledged within 14 days and would be replied to within 21 days. It's the most challenging thing that I do, but I do not fail that promise. But I expect my public servants to do exactly the same thing. And the public in Gibraltar know that if they don't get a response from a civil servant within 21 days or 14 days after an acknowledgement, they write to me and they get an answer within 14 days, an acknowledgement within 14 days and an answer within 21. Now, if we do all of that and then we deliver like that, then the public sector can work from 8 in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon throughout the year. it doesn't matter. They're giving a better service to the private sector and to citizens. But we have to be accountable that way. We can't expect to be paid from the taxpayer, from the public purse, and not be accountable for what we do.
Thank you very much for your comment. I was looking around to see if the deputy governor was in the room. Well, the governor is here, better yet. I certainly hope that you heard that last point about it's the whole concept of a charter in the public service, the charter with the public, an agreement with the public. I recall that years ago we introduced that and it fell by the wayside. It didn't last very long, I have to tell you. Before I turn to Russell to ask him about a comment, his reaction to a comment that you made, and I hope Russell you were listening to everything because you're going to be quizzed. I have to ask Chief Minister Ricardo about what has happened or how Gibraltar developed into the online gaming jurisdiction of the world. And I say that knowing that perhaps it will never happen in BVI. We are all Christians, Methodists, what have you, Christians, and it may never happen.
So
But I think Russell having understanding to tell me to shut up, but I think we all want to hear very quickly.
well, let me tell you what happened in a nutshell. During the GSLP administration of 88 to 96, the then Chief Minister of Gibraltar, Mr. Joe Bassano, who was my predecessor as leader of the Socialist Party, had a meeting with the head of Ladbrokes, who were talking to the senior partner of my then law firm. And Ladbrokes were going to Luxembourg. And the senior partner of my law firm said, why are you going to Luxembourg? It's a civil law jurisdiction, you don't speak the language. He said, well, we're going to do something called phone vetting. This was before the internet in 1994. And we're going to pay 2% tax. So James Levy said, come and see Joe Bassano before you make any decisions. And at the sort of roundtable meeting that they had afterwards, and this is before the EU prohibited negotiations as to tax rates, etc., Joe said to them, well, look, come to Gibraltar. We speak the language, we're a common law jurisdiction, pay 1.5% tax. We'll give you exclusivity for 2 years. We won't allow anybody else to be licensed. They came to Gibraltar. They became the first telephone bettors. Just before we lost the election in '96, a gentleman by the name of Victor Chandler also came to Gibraltar and got a license. He became the second. Telephone betting became internet betting. A lady called Ruth Parasol turned up with her husband and some Indian designers of algorithms to Gibraltar, and they created something called party gaming. And what Peter did as Chief Minister was he ensured that we only took the big players in the industry after that. And so Gibraltar now has only 26 online gaming companies. You look at Malta, you look at some of the other jurisdictions, they have hundreds, if not thousands, of these online gaming companies. But the 26 biggest in the world are all in Gibraltar. Now, how did we do it? It started, as I've explained to you, but from the minute that Ladbrokes were in Gibraltar, they insisted that the Gaming Commission in Gibraltar, that the regulation of gaming in Gibraltar should be the toughest regulation possible. Because they wanted their clients to know on the end of the phone that their money was secure, that their stake was secure, and that their winnings would be secure, and that they would be paid, and there was no chance that they were going to be done out of this money just because they were dealing remotely with their bookie who was far away in Gibraltar. So the key to success has been the highest standard of regulation of online gaming in the whole of Europe and possibly the whole of the world.
Thank you for that. Russell, can I ask Russell one quick question?
Yes, certainly.
Russell, the question, the point, a point that Chief Minister Ricardo made was that government should be a facilitator and it should not necessarily be the largest investor in the country.
Actually, I don't think we should be the largest spender in our economy. Facilitate others' capital
You should be a
spending.
facilitator. I wondered what your response was to that.
I think that's completely right. I think that it's absolutely vital that public service works with private industry, private companies to do lots of the things we've been talking about, whether that is leading, being involved in the policy debate, working out how we educate our our children and our youth so that they can be the business leaders and the government leaders of tomorrow. It has to be a partnership. And I don't think there's any harm in the public service turning around and challenging private enterprise as to how they get involved.
Certainly, it's very vital that we understand that collaborative effort is needed by the private, public sector. One of the things that we instituted very quickly was a tripartite committee, which was bringing the private sector together, as well as the government, and in addition to that, the unions, sitting down together, talking about economically, where do we go from here? And this is a conversation that continues on today as to how do we continue to be an economic powerhouse by including all the shareholders or stakeholders. That way you have buy-in as to the decision and the pathway that you take. So it was very key for us as a government to bring those entities together. Vitally important. One of the other things that we did, I mentioned it before, was bringing all of the unions together. We were able, by bringing all the unions together and negotiating with them on one contract, we saved millions of dollars by doing that. They collectively decided to take a 4.5% cut in their pay, and they also took a furlough day, because us Islanders, we like a holiday as well, or a day off, and they did do that. Now, what we're also doing with the day off and with this pay cut is ensuring that we get efficiency out of the civil service. That if they're there for 8 hours, we're not getting 2 and 3 hours of work, and the rest is looking at the internet, that we actually do get a full day's worth of productivity. And what I found was many of the civil servants are doing a fantastic job, but there's always some out there who are taking advantage of the system, and it's concerning to me. I was looking at it, and I can't remember the last time we fired someone from civil service. Can't be out of 5,600 people employed. No one was let go. That goes back to efficiency, and I'm not saying that we want to fire people. That's not what but you get where I'm coming from. But the collaborative effort is very important.
Sure. Well, Premier Kennedy, I think the other thing you need because of BPI is that we have no unions. Although I say once, no unions. So that's one thing you don't have to fight with, or the government does not have to fight with. But I wanted to hear from our own Premier in terms of this public sector, private sector partnership, whether he had any thoughts, quick thoughts on it.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. I'd just like to confirm that we in BBI also believe in the public-private partnership. And we've been speaking about that for many years as far as the financial services is concerned. We believe it's because of that partnership that our financial services got its position that it is in now. We also believe in partnership on a more general basis. Matter of fact, at the beginning of this period of the government, we formed the Economic Advisory Committee of private individuals who should meet regularly. They've met with government a few times, and they continue to meet because we believe that private industry one who should come up with the ideas to sort of drive the economy forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Russell, is there time for questions?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, thank you very much. The floor is now open.
I heard an inspiring story from Mr. Picato once about something that they've done in Gibraltar with respect to job placement. And I think it's a great story that I'd like him to actually share with this audience. Oh, I'm sorry. I stepped on that, I guess.
Oh, you just did.
Oh, you did? Yeah. You did. Good, so that was an easy.
Perhaps I can share something quickly with you, which I didn't tell you in the context of what I told you about was something we called Employment Training Company Limited, which does this work. We also did something for graduates, which didn't deal with that issue, which was to say, right, if you're a returning graduate and we paid for your education and you cannot find a job, in a sector which you are foolish to go into because we don't do marine biology in Gibraltar. Right? In order to help you adapt, we will give you a job in the government service, but not a permanent job. In other words, not a permanent and pensionable job, for 2 years, so that you can get experience, and we'll drive you into one of the areas that does a lot of business-oriented parts of government, so that you can start to get experience and you can become more sellable in the public sector. But at the end of the 2 years, your job is over. So you have got to find yourself a job in those 2 years. We're not finding you a job as we are in ETCL, and it's working very well. And people are using their experience in government as the experience that they need to sell to employers, because otherwise employers say, well, now you've got the degree, you've got the master's, but you have no experience. So we're giving them the degree, we're giving them the master's, and now we're providing the experience too.
At the risk of getting called out by a good friend of mine who I'm looking straight at, now I applaud you for making decisions that are not necessarily political decisions.
Yeah, and they're uncomfortable sometimes.
They are uncomfortable to do that. We need to make more of those in the media, not nothing anything. Very quickly. I saw a hand, 2 hands, in fact, Karen, did I see you? I saw Mr. Knox, and then Karen, and then Jerry.
I have a question for you. Can you provide some insight, because you share a lot, but I want the Boardwalk Tourism product here in the Caribbean. Can you provide some insights on your tourism product, and challenges of the tourism product, both perspective on outbound and inbound tourism? I would love to learn a little bit more about what's going on there. Thank you.
Thank you. If you look at Gibraltar, as I told you before, it's 1.5 miles at its widest point, 2 miles at its longest point. We've got a rock in the middle, we've got an airport in the north, and then we've got a very friendly neighbour called Spain, just right. 30,000 of us. We have 12 million tourists a year. They come on cruise ships, they come on aeroplanes, they come across the frontier. When Spain tries to choke us at the frontier, we suffer in terms of the number of tourists that come across the frontier. We're the biggest jurisdiction in Europe for people to get married in. John Lennon got married in Gibraltar. Sean Connery got married in Gibraltar more than once. He had a license to thrill more than once. The marriage product doesn't require you actually to be resident in Gibraltar. We're changing that. We're going to require people who come to become married in Gibraltar to spend at least 1 night in Gibraltar. We realized otherwise we were just making £5 from them, the fee for the marriage certificate. Right? But look, at least you can take 1 night and enjoy your first night of nuptials in Gibraltar, or your last night before becoming a married man and married woman in Gibraltar. But the product has to be right, and that's where Gibraltar has been failing. Even though we're getting the numbers of tourists, they're not coming back to see us again because the product was not right. Now, we don't have Mickey Mouse, but we have the Barbier. The only place in Europe where there's a roaming monkey is in Gibraltar. You'll see him all over town. We have an upper rock that is a nature reserve that's very attractive. We have beaches, but we needed to do more. So we needed to create products around that niche product. We also needed places to stay. We don't have the best hotels in Gibraltar. So we needed our hotels to up their game. And however much we encouraged them in the first year that we were in government to up their game, they were very comfortable. 80% occupancy rate, why do you need to refurbish? So we spent money lending to a company that's developed a floating 5-star hotel called Sunborn that opens in Gibraltar next month. We will at last have a really world standard 5-star hotel. Since then, all the other hotels have started their development. And the new Marriott has started to be built in Gibraltar, has gone to Development and Planning Commission. So sometimes you've got to take risks and you've got to say, well, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. You're right to tell me as a hotelier, why aren't I doing anything about hotels? Why should you put your hand in your pocket? Here's £40 million for a new 5-star hotel to be ready and operating in Gibraltar in the next 8 months. Now let's see you put your money in your pocket and let's see you put your money where your mouth is. So that's worked, and we're developing the product. And Gibraltar is already very different to what it was 2 years ago. I challenge you to have a better time than you can on Gibraltar on the 10th of September when we celebrate our National Day. I had both these gentlemen with me last year. It's as good as a Brazilian carnival, but it's just 12 hours, and we shoot 30,000 red and white balloons into the air to celebrate the right of self-determination of the people of Gibraltar. They tend to float over Spain afterwards. And all of that makes for a tourist problem that I hope is improving.
I could ask you more about the carnival, but Harriet?
He behaved himself admirably.
From Canon there, I want to thank you so much. I certainly enjoyed all of the presentations, specifically yours. If I was a baby, I would vote just for you based on that presentation. I would like to know, in the BVI, we have looked at some, I would say, long-term strategies in terms of readying our young people for the international business sector, such as teaching financial industry in the high schools. I hear there's talks about having young people speak Mandarin soon or learn Mandarin soon, because we share the same things in terms of international business. What can you share with us as Premier that you're doing in Bermuda for the BVI to learn from?
Yes. One of the things we found was that waiting too long to get our young people interested or knowledgeable about the industry, the main industry that we're in. We were waiting until they got into high school, and by that time, the high school students had already started formulating their ideas on where they wanted to go based on whatever that influence may be, whether it's home or the likes. So we now have started a program that approaches them during the primary school years, of getting them, those within the private sector, into the schools, talking about what it is that they do. One of the challenges also was that we did not have enough, and I'll be frank with you, we did not have enough males involved. And I'll be even more frank, we did not have enough black males involved in the international sector, finance sector. That was a real challenge, and that's why we decided that we needed to get to them even earlier, before they started formulating their own ideas on what they wanted to do. And now we have probably a proliferation of teachers and lawyers. We've got a statistic of for every teacher, you know, we've got like 8 or 9 students. The ratio is just atrocious. There's too many teachers, and then when it comes to lawyers, got to be for every 2 or 3 people we got a lawyer. You can have your private lawyer. And so we began to see where even lawyers were being laid off, because we were going the way to be attorneys, but there was, when they got here, there was nowhere for them to go. But yet we could see that we did not have enough of the local community involved in the international sector, and that was primarily because we were not educating them early enough. I can't say enough about education. And we're wrestling with it as well. It's probably the most plagued ministry out of all the overseas territories, and around the world, really and truly. And that is because I don't believe that we place enough emphasis, meaning support and money behind education, looking for solutions.
I think it'd be helpful. You won't find many international socialists that agree much with Tony Blair, but he said one thing which was absolutely right, that the key to the future is education, education, education.
Yeah.
And you touched on something which is important, which is teaching people to speak Mandarin and Cantonese. What we're doing there is we've approached a group called the Confucius Institute, which is in China. And they come into schools, literally from the age of 4, and start to teach Chinese. And we're hoping to start that next term. It'll be voluntary for people aged, well, not for people, for parents, children aged 4 onwards. But it'll be an option for people aged 12 onwards for them to choose themselves. Because I think otherwise, if you don't do something to give them the opportunity to learn Chinese, how could people do that? And interestingly, we have the same problem as Bermuda, perhaps as the BVI. Too many lawyers, but not enough accountants. So what we're having to do is to get people interested in accountancy. I wish that John Grisham would write a good book about an accountant, so that people get interested in accountancy, because we're having to import accountants.
Well, on that note, now we will ask one of our leading lawyers, Jerry Ferraro, please come to ask his question. I will not comment on whether the answer
Sorry.
is
Thank you very much, Lorna, for the opportunity. Russell will try to exclude me. I don't know whether you share the same view in terms of lawyers. But my question really is for the Premier of Bermuda. You know, all of the overseas territories are, to some extent, limited by the constitution under which they operate. And within those constitutions, there is a certain dynamics that is set out as in terms of the relationship between the locally elected government and the British government. And of course, it is said that Bermuda has the most advanced constitution of the overseas territories. And I wonder from experience in Bermuda, can you just give us a sort of indication as to in what ways has that sort of advancement in the Bermuda Constitution benefited the Bermuda in terms of ensuring that Bermuda continues to thrive, and particularly as it relates to dealing with the international community and in terms of representation and interaction by the local government?
Certainly, a great question, actually. And I'll put it in the simplest form as possible. It resulted in the fact that we have, Bermuda probably has a ratio, the wealthiest middle class, black middle class in the world. That's in trouble right now because we've not made some good decisions of the recent past. But being able to have that self-determination, being able to make the decisions on your own as to where you want to go, has led to the progress as to where we are today. You know, it becomes, Fabian and I were talking about some of these things, it becomes very difficult when the people of an island wish to go in a certain direction, but yet you've got things working against you, like the Constitution, your own Constitution, that doesn't allow you to be self-determining, to make decisions for yourself in the direction that you want to go in. I would encourage, it's a bit of a sell-out question because you got the governor here, and I'm not sure if my phone is tapped if the lights are. But it has resulted economically in allowing Bermuda to be well advanced in its standard of living, one of the best standards of living in the world, actually. And so we need to press on. It is a progressive state, and I would encourage all the overseas territories to move towards a constitution as we have. But that's going to require some fortitude on your behalf. You cannot back down. You did hear me. You cannot back down. And I know that, there have been challenges of the past, but I do believe that the UK government today wants to work with us. Now, I'll be frank with you, I've questioned that. All right, I'll be frank with you. I have questioned that. And the governor and I, your own governor and I, had one or two chats about it. With my own governor, I've had chats about it. Because even with our advanced constitution, we're still looking for opportunities to take over what the government's doing. Because we should be in a perpetual state of progress. And, I want to give you some history here. The English government, the number 10 Downing Street, really wanted us to be self-sufficient. They didn't want to have to pay for us. And so that's really how we got into the positions of international finance centers. You go back and look at your history and how we became what we are today. It was because we also wanted to pay for ourselves. And the UK government said, we're going to back off and let you do your thing. I think for a large degree, it wasn't anticipated that we'd become as good as we did, the overseas territories. And I like to choose my words wisely, but I do also want to be frank. Orlando is always laughing at me because I tend to say it like it is, and I'm trying to be politically correct here. We cannot call behind the blue. I said that already. We are good at what we do. And we enter into the International Finance Center as honorable members with integrity. And then when I see the slice of the NGOs and the likes coming from the United States and Europe, you should be very concerned about that. It is an indictment on who you are. And that's why we need to stand up as a group and say, listen, we've been living up to these standards and you haven't. You haven't. In fact, If I were to go to London today, if I were to go to the United States and say, give me your beneficial register, they couldn't do it. We can. I can in Bermuda. I can do that. And so, you know, it's important that we put the facts on the table. And what I found is that our big brothers, because we became pretty much independent in what it is that we were doing, they really didn't understand what we were doing because we were just out there on our own. And so we need to educate number 10 Downing Street, we need to educate the United States on exactly what it is that we did. Now, Fabian has very well put together the progress that we're in, and I believe that we need to incorporate as islands. Because if a big company like Walt Disney wants to incorporate a subsidiary, he should be coming to the BVI. And when he wants to invest his money, he should be going to the Cayman. And when he buys his reinsurance, he should be coming to Bermuda. It is a one-stop shop opportunity that we have. But we must be pressing forward as far as our Constitution is concerned and advancing it. Now, the question comes up is whether we want independence, and we've been fighting this battle for some time. I personally believe that we missed the window of opportunity of independence. Why would I go independent now when I can travel to the United States without a visa and go to Europe and go to school and work in the life? Why did I do that? Do you understand? So these are questions that we need to, but self-determination, and when I got to Gibraltar, I'm going to tell you, when I thought of self-determination, my incline was independence. I thought, well, to be self-determined meant independence. But when I saw what I was experiencing, I'm not after independence. I'm after more control over what goes on in my own island. And it's good when we can get governors who are engaging. And you have a governor who's a very smart guy. So I tiptoed around him a little bit there. but he can rest in the fact that he knows that I will tell him like it is, and what our people believe in, and so that's important.
And I think sorry for me.
Go ahead.
Don't finish your point.
I'm done.
Oh, okay. No, I just wanted to round off, and this is going to make the final question, by saying that you have reinforced so succinctly the case for greater unity about the overseas territories. And I hope that can be pursued very soon. Elise, yours is, I hope a short question with a...
It's a question, here in the BVI, we are challenged in terms of our public relations. I note in Bermuda, the online commenters and bloggers are a little bit more considerate in their thoughts that they put up on comments, and the media is a bit more friendly toward the government. How do you do that? How do we win the public relations issue domestically as well as internationally? Because I think in terms of all the issues that we've discussed today, we do have to win the public relations issue internationally for us to move forward to the next level.
Certainly. You've got to, listen, you have a compelling story. You have got to tell your story. See, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And the why is the story. You are a thriving people, but you have not gone out, just like Bermuda, and told your story enough. So you've allowed perceptions to come in based on what someone else is imposing. And I want to say this here. I am delighted, and I give great kudos to your premier. And I'm going to call her First Lady for going to Hong Kong and setting up office there. Because you're getting out there and telling your story. Remember this here. You're not competing against Bermuda and Gibraltar, you know. You're not competing against each other in BVI. You're on the world stage. And all of BVIans, is that how you say it? You need to understand that you are on the world stage. This is not about local stuff. This is about international survival. The reason you are, the reason you need to be proud is because you're on international stage. You're surfing with the big boys. You need to tell your story. Your young people don't know the story, and your adults don't even know the story. That's why politically he's taking licks for traveling. I need to tell you this here. When I was at the World Islamic Economic Forum, the one thing that the liberal Islamic nations said was this: well, where are you? I haven't seen you. And I can guarantee the same that about many other overseas territories as well. You have to get in front of them. It is a competitive world. If you don't get in front of them, guess what? Someone else will. The days of where you could sit back and allow them to come to you are gone. Okay? And although we may have different currencies, it's a one world economy right now. And you need to be thinking like that. So you need to get out there and tell your story, which leads me to one other thing, and that is this. Yes, we want our own people to come back and show their prowess, but quite frankly, there's not enough jobs, maybe, for all of us to come back. The prowess in who you are as a nation really is you becoming the best at what you do and exporting that expertise. In other words, I want to see my own people in China as an architect, as an attorney, and the likes, because now you're telling your story. The Chinese are coming into your place. They're telling their story. You need to be doing the exact same thing. It is about us being a true international center where we import and export intellectual capital. You get that?
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the honorable gentleman.
I just wanted to show them one thing. Can
Oh,
you
yeah,
show that
go
last
ahead.
slide that I have?
The one is, gone.
One last slide. And it says it all.
While she's looking, I just want to very quickly, in the interest of time, thank you both, Premier Canadair and the Chief Minister Ricardo, and no less for the brilliant presentations that you've made. I know, Russell Harrigan, that we have way overstepped the time, but I think it was time well spent. And I think everybody would agree that it needed to be said. So there's a do you want to come? It speaks for itself.
I think it speaks for itself.
It speaks for itself.
Yes, despite, and we talk about it in local politics, all the noise when you're a politician. Despite the noise, and I want to talk about it internationally, despite the noise, you never, ever give up.
I agree with that.
This is our century. Absolutely right. This is our century.
I totally agree with that personally.